I'm Sharon Weingarten, and I'm delighted to continue our pardon me, our mental health task force series. Today on a very different subject. We've talked a lot about youth, and we're going to the other end of the age spectrum. And our speaker today will be Cynthia Phon from the North Shore Senior Center, who will talk about living with people who have dementia. And Cynthia, go right ahead. I know you can use use all the time we've got.
Terrific. Can I share my screen?
Looks
Okay.
good. Looks good.
Okay, let me just put that in slideshow. Can you guys see the stuff at the end?
May 5th. Down, I just see the blue card for the senior center.
That's perfect. I know sometimes it shows up the views
Shows more than you want.
differently.
Okay.
All right, so thanks everybody for being here. I'm Cynthia Phon. I'm the Director of House of Welcome Adult Day Services and Senior Options at North Shore Senior Center. And today I'm going to talk about effective communication and caregiving options for people living with dementia. We'll give you a teeny overview of North Shore Senior Center in case you don't know with us, just for some level setting, a dementia definition, and then get into communication techniques and tips. So North Shore Senior Center, we are headquartered in Northfield with offices in Niles and Glenview. We're a not-for-profit that was founded in 1956. Funded through program fees, donations, and grants, and we serve more than 24,000 older adults and their families every year, spanning 39 plus communities. We have things you would think of as traditional senior center services through our lifelong learning department. That is things like classes, trips, clubs, education. We have a Tuesday club, really amazing things. Senior and Family Services is a very large department of mostly social workers who help people living in the community remain living at home, which is their goal. The vast majority of the folks they see are people living at the poverty level. We offer therapy and counseling, and House of Welcome Memory Care, which is where I sit. And we have a program for people who have early memory loss called Mind Matters. We have a day program that's open Monday to Friday for people of all levels of dementia. We have a monthly memory cafe for people who are living with dementia and their care partners to pop in, and we really provide robust support for family caregivers of people living with dementia. So again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, dementia is not a diagnosis. It's an umbrella term for different things that might cause impairment in memory and other cognitive abilities that are significant enough that they interfere with everyday life. The most common type of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, which most people have heard of, but there are also vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal dementia, as well as a whole host of others. The Alzheimer's Association, which is where I got this great graphic, actually says that more than 50% of people who have a diagnosis actually have a mixed dementia, which is having more than one cause. So I like to break down the disease stages into simple
Cynthia,
terms.
this is
Yes.
Jillian. I just want to interrupt you slightly. Are you advancing the presentation? Because we still
I am. Is it not advancing?
It's not advancing.
Oh, goodness. I will try to unshare and share again. Thank you so much for letting me know that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, I'd rather know. Okay, let me try again. What can you see now?
Yes.
Does it change if I do that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay,
see.
we're
Now we've got
back
the
in
puzzle
business.
piece,
Thank
puzzle
you
pieces.
so much. Okay, so I was saying I like to, there's a lot of different ways to think about disease stages. The Alzheimer's Association has a 7-step disease stage. Tifa Snow, if you've heard of her, has a GEMS model where there's, I think, about maybe 6 stages. I like to think in just more simplistic terms: mild cognitive impairment, early stage, moderate stage, late stage.
Okay.
Whoops. That was me, sorry. Um, so mild cognitive impairment is sort of not a diagnosis of dementia, but I like to mention it because some people who get a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment do go on to get a diagnosis of a type of dementia, but not everybody. So early stage is really the beginning. There's short-term memory loss, maybe some confusion, disorientation, might experience some word finding, impaired judgment. This is where you might start seeing some mood changes, some depression, anxiety, or apathy. People might start to maybe isolate themselves a little bit. They might not be comfortable. They might be forgetting appointments. They also might be having some difficulty managing finances. Moderate, as you might imagine, things are getting a little bit more intense, more of a decline in verbal skills, a lot more repetition, a lot more word finding, confusion, poor judgment, difficulty with vision and perception of where things are. So people might go to sit down and they might not be aligned with the seat, or vision in dementia often changes. So if I now have a complete field of vision, as my dementia progresses, my field of vision changes and gets more narrow. So a lot of things I don't see, so might cause some difficulties there. This is also the stage where you might notice some difficulty with personal care, either being able to sequence enough to dress or bathe, grooming, might be some incontinence at this point, and again, also mood changes. At this point, it could be when it's not safe for a person to be alone or to drive. Late stage is really where someone has lost most of their abilities. They can't communicate, severe memory loss, a decline in motor skills. They become almost completely reliant on others for their personal care. They might not recognize people, and they often need support 24/7. And the reason I mention these and why I like to keep it simple is, people aren't timelines. And I find that people often don't necessarily, might have one from early stage, something from moderate, things change. But I'm mentioning it now because the communication stages, the communication and how you might interact with someone relies a little bit on understanding their abilities. So someone who has MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or is at the early stage, might be having word finding difficulties. Again, they might be a little quieter or withdrawn, and they might, make some comments that don't quite make sense. Whoops. In the moderate stage, more difficulty being able to name both people and objects. Reading, actually, and writing might become challenging. Conversations are difficult to follow, especially if there's a group. So, large gatherings, social functions, even going out to eat can become challenging. This also might be the stage where word meanings don't necessarily mean what they used to. So someone might say yes when they mean no, or use a word like pen and they don't mean pen. So this is where nonverbal communication starts being very important. In the later stage, as you would imagine, there's limited vocabulary, someone might not be able to speak, and it's hard to know what someone understands. Written language might not, someone might not be able to read, so written language isn't a great tool at that point, but nonverbal communication often can remain. So I've mentioned verbal and nonverbal. So just to think about it, verbal is, initiating words, using vocabulary, having a sentence, having sentences in a way that convey meaning, and kind of, social conventions about taking turn to speak. Nonverbal, and these become super important with people living with dementia, really at any stage, is eye contact, your facial expression and body language, nodding and kind of moving your head to convey understanding, hand gestures. I always think of like the flight attendants, and pictures or drawings to help communicate. It really, the whole saying a picture can convey 1,000 words ends up being really true with people living with dementia. In terms of communication and people living with dementia, a really important thing to consider is that behavior is an attempt to communicate and has meaning. So a lot of behavior changes that kind of can get pathologized are really the result of the disease process, and they're not someone deliberately being annoying or being difficult. Behavior can be influenced by the environment. If things are really cluttered, that makes it harder for someone who's living with dementia to process what's going on, as well as the caregiving approach can influence behavior. And I'll talk a little bit more about the caregiving approach as I continue. But just things to think about is, declining skills in someone living with dementia can result in anxiety, in fear, in anger or depression. Someone might lose social screening. So might say things that you would not say typically if you did not have dementia or, this change in your brain. And someone might also not understand what they're hearing and then might respond to this misunderstanding. So for the most successful communication, it's important to match your communication style to the person's abilities. The main thing I will say about communicating with someone living with dementia is it is impossible to win an argument with someone who's living with dementia because their brain is telling them whatever they're saying that isn't right, their brain is telling them that is true. So don't argue. Try to accept the person's reality, and not rationalize and try to convince them. This is a great time to identify and acknowledge someone's feelings, instead of maybe focusing on the content. Something like, oh, that sounds really difficult. I can see you're so upset, versus no one took your wallet, mom. And, offer acceptance, reassurance, empathy, but don't be patronizing. People with dementia are acutely aware of that. And to the best that you can, remain calm in what can be trying situations. Talked about kind of some sensory changes, especially in vision. You want to approach someone who's living with dementia from the front. Make eye contact. If someone is sitting or and you're standing, get to their level so that you can be right in their line of sight. Address them by name. State your name and who you are. This is not the time to do what I like to call the pop quiz. Who am I? Remember my name? If they could, they would say it, and they might, but puts much less stress on someone if you say, oh, I'm Cynthia. I'm from the senior center. It's nice to see you, Hillary. Speak in simple, straightforward terms. Focus on things. If you're asking for things, focus on what you want, not what you don't want. And if possible, provide choice. If the person can make choices, if they can't, don't ask them, because that's just going to be frustrating. Similarly, don't ask questions unless you know someone can respond, because that might cause someone frustration or anger. If you're trying to do something with someone, tasks, even things that seem really simple, can often require a lot of specific steps in a very specific sequence. I always think of like brushing your teeth. Seems super simple. You need to do this. Nope, you need to go into the bathroom, know where the toothpaste is kept, open, if it's in a medicine cabinet, open the door, find the toothpaste, not something else in a tube that looks super similar. Take it out, unscrew the cap, put it on, get the toothbrush, take it out, be able to have the dexterity to put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, and then, maybe turn the water on. So step-by-step instructions become super important, and you might not be able to give them all at once. So what we do at House of Welcome, we'll be like, oh, can you take this out of the cupboard? Can you put it on the table? For someone who really can only hold it, they can still do things, but they just can't say, could you take this out of the cupboard, put it on the table, and then start stirring. You want to speak slowly and allow ample time for someone to kind of not only hear what you're saying, but for them to process. This is everyone who has a dementia, they have brain impairment, their brain is shrinking. They need more time to understand what people are saying. So, it might seem awkwardly long to you, but it is very helpful to kind of pause and let someone kind of take it in. Again, don't argue or correct or try and rationalize why what you're saying makes sense. It's just not, I'd say most of the time, if not all of the time, it's not going to get what you're looking for from it. You also don't need, I've talked to a lot of different families. Think about what you need to convey. You know that someone has a doctor's appointment in 2 weeks, and you make an appointment when you're leaving. You don't need to be making sure that they know that that's happening in 2 weeks, because you might get questions about it every single day. You might get people who get confused about the time and wake up and think it's time to go because they're not sure what day it is. So being vague is okay and can be a technique. Although everyone who's living with dementia has, cognitive impairment and has this brain change, they are still people who have a lot of awareness. So don't talk to someone in front of them. Don't talk about them in front of them. It might seem, and I've heard family members say, "Oh, it's all right. He doesn't know what you're saying." Again, sometimes people understand more than they convey, and people often can understand the intent, even if they don't understand the word. So you wouldn't do that in front of someone who doesn't have dementia because it's rude. Also, I would encourage you not to speak in front of someone like that. And try to include the person in the conversation, even if they can't respond verbally. We have a variety of people who at all different levels here in the day program. And, if someone can't respond, let's say we're playing a Wheel of Fortune type game and we're having people guess letters. We wouldn't want to skip someone because that would exclude them, but we might say, oh, Frank, do you want to guess F for Frank? So that we're including them. So you can, find different ways to include people. Again, sorry, my mouse is overly sensitive right now. Sometimes nonverbal communication can be helpful. We're going over there. Helen is sitting there, gesturing, Sometimes labeling things with pictures versus words, especially the bathroom. And then some things to say, I've talked a lot about not saying, do you remember, not, correcting people. Some things to say that kind of validates what someone's saying, what they're going is, oh, I'm sorry. And it could be, I'm sorry you're going through that. I'm sorry that's happening to you. I'm sorry really can be used in a multitude of ways. I understand, oh, sounds good, sounds terrific. Oh, that's so interesting. If someone seems frustrated, can acknowledge that. That must be difficult. What can I do to help? Or I'm sorry, I was trying to help. Things really that validate the person versus focusing too much on what they might be saying, particularly if you're not in agreement or it doesn't seem reality based. I alluded to this earlier. If you're making plans, tell the person living with dementia about them shortly before they're going to occur, depending on the person. And again, all of this is dependent on an individual. The saying is, if you know someone who's living with dementia, you know one person who's living with dementia, because it really can be so unique to an individual. But oftentimes telling someone, especially once they get to a moderate stage ahead of time, might just cause a lot of anxiety and causing someone to perseverate and ask about things. Um, you know, Sometimes distracting or redirecting someone is a really effective technique to to deal with someone who's very repetitive or focusing on certain things, and you don't want, someone, I want to go home. Oh, you are home, mom. Oh, or, you told me you loved the kitchen at home. Was wondering if you could come. I want to show you something in the kitchen. You want to, use reassurance and praise as you can. It's nice to make someone feel good, but not in a way that's patronizing. People living with dementia still will understand the difference between a compliment and something over the top. One of the other things, just in terms of communication, is, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, just to pay attention to the environment, just in terms of keeping things clutter-free, clear, not to have things that are too stimulating, have things that are bright and good lighting. These just help someone be more aware of their environment and then just helpful in terms of general interactions. Looking at the time, I will go super fast through some care partner techniques. Try and keep someone who's living with dementia as active and involved as possible. It is super important for people, regardless of dementia, to feel that they are useful and productive. Afternoons and evenings can be challenging times, so you might want to plan things that are a little more restful and calm then. You might have heard of sundowning. For the care partner, this is what they say on the airplanes, put your oxygen mask on first so that you're able to help someone else. I can't stress how overwhelming it can be to be the primary care partner for someone who is living with dementia, so taking care of themselves, recognizing that this is tough, maybe looking for a support group or seeking counseling, looking for learning about dementia, workshops. There's tons online. There's books and videos. And sometimes the care partner also can find themselves isolating a bit because it just can seem overwhelming. They need maybe help in a different way. And I encourage all the care partners I speak with to not only get help, but as they're talking to people, to be specific about what they need. Maybe someone who used to, have coffee with the guys every Sunday morning, the guys aren't coming around, maybe call someone who's been a particularly good friend and say, you know, can you take Joe out for a half an hour for coffee? It would be really helpful. It would be meaningful to him. Or could you come over and have coffee? But to be really specific, people often want to help, but I think they get scared. Dementia, they say, is the most stigmatized medical condition. So I do encourage care partners to get help. The other thing for care partners is to think about what's next. Legal and financial planning, powers of attorney, emergency planning if something happens to the care partner, as well as long-term planning. This is where the stages can be important. In the early stage, and the person living with dementia can be involved in their own care planning and what they might want in the future. That was really, really, really fast. I am open to any questions you might have. And if not now, feel free to call or email, or if you know anyone who maybe is in a situation where they're caring with someone living with dementia, please feel free to share my information. People
Hi,
often don't
Cynthia.
know where to start.
Hi, Cynthia. This is Jillian. I was going
Hi.
to ask a question about what recommendations you have for helping young children engage with someone who might be experiencing this. So, like if you have a teenager or a young person who might not fully understand what their grandparent or older relative is experiencing, how you might, some suggestions for them.
Oh, such a good question. I think part of it, there are some books that can be useful. I think, you know, explain, depending on the age of a child, I think explaining things in a way that, you know, children can understand. You're going to explain, you know, so-and-so, you know, Uncle Bill doesn't understand as much differently to a 5-year-old than you might, you know, someone in high school. I will look though to see, if I have anything specific. There's also an organization in based in Evanston called Lorenzo's House that is specifically designed to support children whose parents are diagnosed with diagnosed with dementia.
Cynthia, I saw it's not so much about children, although it could be useful for someone of any age. It made me stop and listen. I don't know, it's on the computer. I don't know, on something popped up. It was Maria Shriver talking about, I'm sure you probably saw that, about a memory with her father. And he said he was saying how he was speaking, and he was saying how he enjoyed being with her and listening to the rain. And she corrected him and told him that is not rain, that is the sound of traffic. And he looked confused, and she just said her awareness was, what difference did it make if it was rain or traffic or whatever? He was enjoying time with his daughter. And just that simple little example, it stayed with me.
Yeah, that's a great example. It's a real mind shift because you would almost say that automatically, you know, to a friend or a family member. That's not the rain. But for someone living with dementia, absolutely. It doesn't make a difference that you're connecting with them, talking about something. There's so many things like that.
Cynthia, we do have a question on the chat from Mary Bach. If you think someone is at an early stage, can you share with us how it's evaluated?
Oh, great question. So the first thing I would say is you always want to rule out something that might be physical. So I always suggest, if someone hasn't been to their doctor recently, to go and get a physical exam, because there are some medical conditions, particularly in older adults, that have dementia-like symptoms, like a B12 deficiency, can cause confusion. Easy to treat, not part of a disease. So you want to do that first. I would also talk to a physician who might do some screenings, but you really want to get an appointment with a neuropsychologist or a neurologist and have some specific testing done to get a diagnosis. You know, there's also now there's some new imaging that folks are using. But we do encourage getting a diagnosis. Sometimes families will say, oh, why bother? I can tell there's some dementia. But right now, you know, as there's sadly no cure, very limited medication options, but there are some medications, and it's important to know what type of dementia someone has, because for certain medications, there's some contraindication for them, depending on the type of dementia.
If I could just have a quick follow-up. So would some of those evaluations cause more, I mean, how do you alleviate the stress of telling the person that you want to start going to a neurologist or to a physician, and why? So how do you ease that little bit of the journey?
I think knowing the person is really important. Some people are aware of the changes they're having, some people are not. And it's not just denial. For some people, part of the disease process is this lack of awareness, and that can be super frustrating. That's where a good relationship with the primary care doctor can be helpful, and where, you know, I talked about not sharing everything, being vague. I did not include the discussion of what we call sometimes therapeutic fibs, which are, you know, things that are not necessarily true, but meant to be a kindness. So, you know, you wouldn't tell someone that, you know, their parent had passed away 20 years ago, because it's like a shock every time. You could also use that for, you know, Dr. Smith wants you to see, you know, Dr. Wyatt for a checkup. So sometimes less is more, but it, you know, it really depends on the person. It also, you know, if you're not the person, maybe who would be the best person to do that with, make sure you get whoever the person you suspect is having some brain changes, the person they trust the most to be involved, because they might be able to have the conversation in a slightly different way. But that part can be really tricky.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Cynthia, I wanted to make a comment. Thank
Sure.
you for your excellent work and presentation. Parkinson's is on such an increase. It's really increasing. And Parkinson's related dementia, and you just commented on mixed dementia. So I wanted you to comment on that, and also on special populations. Mike Quirk, who's on this line, also knows if you work with veterans, whether you've got a little bit of traumatic brain injury, or whether you got a little bit of PTSD or a lot, or alcohol, substance abuse, it in veterans, this is a special population of where we're seeing lots of mixed dementia.
Yes, so with Parkinson's dementia, sometimes, you know, they say that, you know, whether it's just diagnosed as Parkinson's dementia or Lewy body dementia, is what symptoms come first. If you have the movement symptoms, you'll maybe get the Parkinson's diagnosis and then the dementia. But some of them are similar. So with Alzheimer's dementia, most of the things I talked about were related to Alzheimer's type dementia. So, you know, the hallmark being short-term memory loss, kind of that forgetfulness. With some of the other types of dementias, this forgetting is not the primary sign. It might be sort of some impaired judgment, certainly with Parkinson's and Lewy body, some sleep disturbances. For frontal temporal dementia, often executive functioning and poor judgment. So I'm not sure if you had a specific question about those.
Well, you said a lot already, but the increase in Parkinson's, it's we're seeing also, you know, dementia is more common at an earlier age.
Yes,
Mixed in.
that is probably more of maybe a medical or something outside of my expertise. But yes, I think they're also getting better at diagnosing dementias. So some of it, particularly, I'll go back to Alzheimer's for a second. The most common risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is age. So as the population is aging, there are more people living with Alzheimer's disease because there are more people alive who are older.
Cynthia, another question on the chat. If you could please explain social screening.
Oh, sure. So social screening is probably what all of us do every day when, we think something to ourselves and we don't say it out loud. Something like, oh, how did they wear that? That doesn't match. Or wow, Aunt Helen really blew up, or, whew, Jimmy has a lot of acne. Those are things you probably wouldn't say out loud because they're rude. Also, racial slurs or using curse words in certain situations. People are able to control that because they have some degree of social screening. With people living with dementia, sometimes that ability to hold it in with language, it's social screening changes. So they might say things. I've heard people say, I've never heard my mother use a swear word before. And well, now she is. And it's not so much that she was always thinking them before, it's just the changes in someone's brain that does not allow them to have this kind of social screening, social filter. And as someone's losing language, things that are the last things they lose are swear words, sex talk, and slurs. So you will find as someone loses language, they might use terms that you've not heard them use before with some frequency.
Cynthia, I'm being
Mhm.
mindful of the time, but I do have it's not so much a question, but a remark that I would like to be included, is that these changes aren't necessarily, probably most often, but not necessarily related to age. I had a relative who had a stroke at a relatively young age, and exactly what you were describing, the use of language and the examples you gave were so right on, and this was someone less than 60 years old.
Yes, no, sorry if I was confusing about age. That was
Not at
just
all. No, not at all. But those brain changes, the physiology was just so
Mhm.
apparent because it was a younger person.
Yes, the things that's true about all types of dementia is, parts of the brain are dying. This is a, progressive degenerative disease, so it only gets worse. So knowing that, yeah, you see a lot of different things changing over time.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you. You were very informative. Thank you for a great presentation.
Hey, Sharon.
My pleasure.
Sharon, it's
Yeah.
Pat and Terry from the Barrington Rotary Club.
Oh, yes.
We would like to just remind everybody, this is something that's on our district calendar already, but we, Barrington Rotary Club and the Barrington Area Library are partnering to put on a mental health fair on Sunday, 5/18 from 2 until 4. It's at the Barrington Library. All the information is on the district calendar, but we're really excited because we have got Meg Kissinger is coming to speak. We have somebody from NAMI and another person that will be doing a panel discussion. So we're very excited about it, and we would love to have anybody that's on this call or anybody in the district to come and see us. That would be awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Could I ask a question? I came in a little.
Know anybody, please, who's maybe stuck or doesn't know what to do with a family member or a friend, please, I'm happy to talk to anybody. This can be really, really difficult.
Is there any medical research being done to discover the causes of it or minimize it at all?
Yes, there's a ton of research, and a lot of it, they've learned a lot, but not, I always say, research is asking questions. And I think right now the research has allowed them to widen and ask better questions, but I think the past 2 years, they've approved some newer medications, which are very expensive, life extending for months versus years. So there's tons of research. It's just the brain is really, really tricky, and very, very
complex, right.
complicated.
Yeah, my ex-wife has developed dementia. She's in a facility. And I remember my mom getting it when she was 94. And at first I didn't believe what she was saying. And then I realized what was going on. I joined an organization called NAMI. I'm up in Wisconsin. Are you familiar with NAMI?
Yeah.
National Alliance of Mental Illness. I started doing research on all of this stuff. And I don't know if you've ever noticed there's one place in Germany where the people would sort of walk out. You're not allowed, it's against the law to prevent somebody from the facility from walking out of the facility. And they had troubles trying to recover those people in the town. And I forget the name of the city. So what they did was they created a false bus stop right outside the facility's door. And people would then go to the bus stop thinking they were going to take a bus. They would sit there for a while. And then somebody from the facility would come out, talk to them, and bring them in. And the rest of this town actually thought it was a real bus stop. And some people would stop there, which was humorous. But the Germans, which is paradoxical, from what they did in the past, they have laws saying you can't stop these people from leaving, but you have to bring them back in a nice way. But I read that and I couldn't believe it. It is so humane of them to do things like that. And there were other things that they manufactured. They had one lady who was an executive in a company, and they set up a desk with papers and in basket, out basket, and she would go out there and answer the phone and think she's talking and move papers around. And when she got through, then she would go back into her room, and that was her work day. So they tried to accommodate these people without enclosing them, prisoning them in their rooms. It was just a marvelous.
Well, House of Welcome is a
it's
day program, so no one sleeps here, but part of our intake process is we collect a very, very detailed social history in addition to all the demographic stuff, so that we can know people's likes and dislikes, their history, so that we can, use that in interacting with them. And we've set up things so that someone could do their work or help lead something, or someone who's a musician play the piano. So yeah, knowing people is a huge part of successfully working with people who are living with dementia.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
mentioned
Thank you for
playing a
sharing
piano.
that, Stan.
I've heard how music can tap into their brains and they remember songs and they come alive with that stuff. A lot of very creative things to help the process, the people with that condition.
Well, thank you, Stan.
All right.
That's very heartwarming, and it's good to hear that it's actually being done, Cynthia, at your facility, and I'm sure at some of the other places where people who need some support in the dementia area can find it. They're caregivers of themselves. So with that, I think that we'll close the meeting for today. We will be back in June. Sharon, remind us the speaker.
In June, it's gonna be on grief.
Okay, on grief.
Hmm?
Thank you.
Cynthia, thank you. And
got
thank you for
first
sharing this.
Monday of the month,
Right.
which is June 2nd at 12 o'clock. And
Right.
recording of this presentation will be on the district website.
Good, thank you. Cynthia,
you.
thank you for sharing that number as opposed to just the general number for North Shore Senior Center. Should anyone want to have any more conversation with you, that's the right email and phone number, the direct phone number for you. Is that correct? Great. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.